Officials from Russia and the Ukraine ended peace talks on Monday and will return to their respective capitals for further consultations before a second round of negotiations. Former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark is with me on this. Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
So peace talks have taken place between Russia and the Ukraine. How confident are you anything will come from this?
Well, it might be a bit of an exaggeration even to call them peace talks. They were at least talks, but then you look at who was there. Ukraine sent its defense minister, which is obviously a senior person in the government. Apparently President Putin sent his advisor on culture. So you have to really question how serious this was. Now, from what I can see, they agreed that there should be another meeting. But I think the concern has been that following the pause for those talks, then President Putin would redouble his efforts. Most commentators agree that the invasion hasn't gone so well for him. Here's this vastly larger army with many more aircraft and everything, which has made very little progress in 4 to 5 days. So the concern now is that he will just blitzkrieg bomb the cities. There'll be a lot of civilian casualties, and it will get even more brutal. So that's the rather bleak assessment, I think, right now.
Well, I was going to ask you, the fact that his army hasn't been as successful as he would have thought, that creates even more danger now, doesn't it, for citizens?
That's correct, because I think because he is so out of touch with Ukraine today, that he probably thought that the Russians would be welcomed with open arms. That's probably the mentality. But of course, the Ukrainians have not only had their president stay and fight, he didn't get in a helicopter and leave. In fact, when the Americans apparently offered him a way out, he said, "I don't need a ride, I need weapons." This man's been incredibly brave, as has his government. But the Ukrainian military's command has held. People have held their lines. They've fought back. The citizens have responded to the call for mobilisation. All men aged between 16 and 60 have been called up. The women are, professional women of all backgrounds are seen, making Molotov cocktails and working out how they can stop. So you've got a mobilised country that doesn't want Putin's troops there. Now, it seems that when he, sent the army sort of rumbling in, that they didn't have enough supplies because presumably they thought Ukraine would just capitulate. So they've had a bit of a pause while they go back and get the trucks and the diesel and the rest of it. I mean, it is a bit humiliating. But as I say, he won't take that as a reason to stop what he's doing. He'll redouble his efforts, and that means more apartment blocks showing and more civilians killed.
And that's what we're facing right now, the concern about the risk of increasing civilian casualties. The more this goes on, the more isolated Russia becomes from the rest of the world, and that poses even greater danger because then we won't know what Russia is trying to achieve, or do Western nations have enough intelligence to try and understand or forecast what Putin may do next?
I think you've got the whole range of scenarios if you're trying to game play it. I mean, the horror one is World War III, where he actually uses a nuclear weapon. Look, that's horrifying, but let's not say it's a likely possibility. The second possibility is that he unleashes the full might of his weaponry, bombs the city, crushes the place and rolls through. But then he must know that to occupy a large country like the size of Ukraine, with a large population in the 21st century, that's not going to be so easy. So then the issue is, where does he? If he's going to stop, short of that, where does he stop? Does he try to take Kiev with street by street fighting, or does he just sit outside and try to starve it out? Same with the other major cities. Would he leave, Ukraine as a rump state? With its access to its seaports for its exports and imports blocked off because he's taken the port cities? Would he hold new lines across the borders? That's a possibility. Now, if you're looking for an off-ramp for the Russians, I think the work that the president of France is doing is incredible. He keeps phoning Putin, even though it hasn't to date done any good, but at least he keeps engaging. And you need to get a proper ceasefire some talks and to try to work out what is the way out of this. Otherwise, these other scenarios come into play.
Does it give you any hope, Helen Clark, that Russia has made some announcement saying both sides have agreed to continue talking and will meet again, quote, in the next few days, end quote?
Yes, that is good. If they'd gone away from the talks saying, well, that was hopeless and we're not going to try that again, that would have been a worry. But look, Putin has to be serious about the talks. You don't send your advisor on culture. It would be like, if New Zealand was being invaded, me sending the Undersecretary for the Arts or something up to talks with the invading Navy. I mean, this is not real. So you need to see some real grunt on the Russian side of the talks. So he's got to get serious for this to be taken seriously.
The United Nations said this morning, New Zealand time, there are now more than 500,000 refugees that have fled Ukraine for neighbouring countries. This is turning out to be not just a war, but also a war that has massive humanitarian crisis elements to it, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. And that's just the beginning. I think some of the estimates were that if it intensifies a lot, you could get 4 to 5 million people going over the borders. And that doesn't include the internally displaced. You could have a couple million more who flee to where they think are safer areas. I've been in touch with someone I know who got his family out of Kiev. A lot of the men are trying to move their families as far towards the border as they can before they go back and fight. So there's a lot of people on the move in Ukraine. It's very tragic. Think of the trauma on children. The worry of the mothers who have to see their partner turn around and go back to fight, knowing they might never see them again. It's absolutely traumatic.
Helen Clark, some of the other images coming out on social media that have been verified is that there are many Russian soldiers that are being captured by Ukrainian forces and just everyday residents, if I can say that. They're being filmed on video saying what their situation was and why they were there. And it reminds me of that quote, older men start wars, but it's the youth that actually have to participate in them, or words to that effect. We are seeing images of incredibly young men that barely look like they're in their teens having to face war. I mean, in that respect in itself, that's a war crime, isn't it? Sending young people to war.
Well, you sort of think of 18-year-old conscripts sent into a battle, barely trained, barely out of high school, and I assume that's what we're seeing. These kids don't want to be there. Their mums will be worried sick. When there were troop movements in eastern Ukraine with the, in effect, occupation there 8 years ago, you had similar reports of boys sort of writing home to mum or trying to ring home mum and say, look, we don't want to be here. So there will be awful casualties on the Russian side as well. And, these kids are just foot soldiers. They didn't have a choice to go where they were going. They can try to run away. If you're a deserter and run away, the kind of fate that meets you. So, these boys might be quite relieved to be taken in by Ukrainians, as long as the Ukrainians don't kill them. I mean, this can get very, very vicious. So, there'll be grief on both sides, and that's why every effort has to be made to stop this before there's more human tragedy.
What was your reaction to the New Zealand statement to the high-level segment of the 49th session of the UN Human Rights Council, where Nai Mahuta, I think, made quite a strong statement? I wondered what your thoughts were.
I think it's great that Nanaya's gone to that high-level segment of the Human Rights Council meeting, and from what I can see, just browsing the headlines this morning, she made a very strong statement condemning the violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and its territorial integrity, the violation of international law and of the UN Charter. I mean, this is Russia, a founding member of the UN, a permanent member of the Security Council with a veto, which is doing this. I mean, this is lawless. In that position as a great power, you should be upholding international law, not undermining it.
The fact that I know there's almost a roster system for the UN Security Council and that it was in February it was Russia's turn. Do you think this war or the timing of Russian being on the Security Council and having the veto powers, do you think that was a coincidence, or do you think this was all timing?
Actually, I think it's a rather embarrassing coincidence for them. But you do have to ask the question, why now? Why did Putin decide to invade now? His noise around Ukraine has been getting greater, but he could have done this at any time in the last 8 years since he annexed Crimea and supported separatists with Russian military help to take that eastern part of Ukraine. And I think in his kind of isolated mind, he saw that the world was distracted, the West was distracted by COVID, by internal challenges and issues. He saw the humiliating exodus of the United States from Afghanistan. He thought, they won't fight, the West won't intervene, and I'll threaten nuclear weapons if they do, and Ukraine will be a pushover. Now, a number of those assumptions were wrong, right? I mean, we are all distracted by COVID, but not so distracted that when people see a democratic country fighting for its existence, they won't try to help it. And, of course, he completely miscalculated the Ukrainian resolve to resist Russian occupation.
Just finally, as a news hound myself, and it's always interesting trying to understand this, but also try to understand where we should be watching and getting our news sources from. Is there a particular international news service or source, Helen Clark, that you admire and respect that would be the first thing you would open up when you're trying to get the very latest on this conflict? I'll be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yes, BBC. But what I do, and my dad's almost 100, he's so aghast at this war, so we tend to watch it for 4 or 5 or 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
It's horrible, isn't it? But we watch BBC, and then we'll turn to CNN on the next hour, because CNN it actually has incredible reporting from the ground in Kiev, but you also hear the American perspective. Then you go back to BBC, sometimes look at Al Jazeera. Also on our Sky platform, we have Russian TV, and that is just horrendous on this. It's just such fake news. You think you're watching a Rambo movie. And then I have a subscription to the New York Times, which is incredible. The Guardian is free to access and is, of course, an excellent paper. I look at the Times of London. I look at Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. So just, looking at it all the time. I mean, just as COVID has been the greatest health crisis of the past century, this is the greatest security crisis in Europe since the end of the Second World War. It is just a huge and devastating development, and it has spillover impacts for all of us. If oil and gas prices go up, if it affects commodity prices, if it affects supplies. Ukraine's one of the biggest exporters of wheat in the world. Now, clearly it's winter at the moment and there's not too much wheat going out, but what about the summer harvest if it can't get wheat out of its ports? I mean, if it's even a country unable to function. So this has global implications, and we have to follow it. We have to be aware of what's happening.
Indeed we do. Helen Clark, just finally, I do want to leave on, I think we can say as a positive note, your dad, George, he turns 100 in several days, doesn't he?
Yes, the 8th of March, exactly a week today. And he has been counting, he'll say to me this morning, 99 years, 11 months, 3 weeks, a week to go.
So he's counting
we're
down.
pretty close to that line.
How will you celebrate with your dad, Helen?
Well, because of the pretty rapid spread of Omicron, I brought forward the family party to this last Saturday, and I had vaccine passes and masks and physical distancing and a lot of people outside and a huge airy garage. No one, apart from doing the photos, people couldn't go near Dad without a mask. So, look, touch fingers. I think we did everything we could. I'd have been very worried about doing it this coming Saturday because we have, great-grandchildren who are in schools and early childhood centres, and that seems to be a major vector for the pandemic. But on the day itself, providing, Waihee beaches and sort of collapsed with Omicron, I intend to do another